You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have women's health queen, Kelsie Anderson. Kelsie is a functional nutritional therapy practitioner who specializes in hormone health, specifically supporting women on and transitioning off of birth control. In this episode, we tackle all things birth control, as well as the things you probably didn't know and how to make the best choices for your body. Kelsie also just shares some best practices about how to live optimally during your cycle. One of those little things being your caffeine intake. So let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome, Kelsie, to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
I'm so excited for this topic. I first found you, I think, through the grapevine in the women's health and wellness world. So I'm really excited just to dive into the specifics of birth control. I feel like that's just like a juicy topic for so many people. And it's definitely a topic that I've become passionate about after living in the fog of birth control for almost 10 years and then coming out on the other side and then reading about the fact that, oh, this is why I had panic attacks in college or I felt like, a different person. All that to say, I would love to hear a little bit about your own story, your family, and then we can dive into how you got started in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know where to start. Introductions are always it's like this massive umbrella field that we can go under, but I'm from Illinois. We currently live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I live with my husband. I have a 13-month-old son and just announced that I'm pregnant with another come late February. So our family is growing, which is exciting. We have a little Australian Shepherd Banks who's 5 years old and just wild as all can be. But yeah, we love Milwaukee. We're very close to the lake, so we will often just go utilize that and hang out and do hikes and hang on the beach and do those types of things. But as far as kind of what do you want me to get into first? More so professional or?
Yeah, wherever you want to go.
Okay. So I graduated from the University of Iowa with a bachelor's in science, and I actually worked in a children's hospital for a couple of years doing something completely different. I was a child life specialist, which most people will probably not know what that is unless they've had a child in the hospital. Long story short, I burnt out very quickly and have always been kind of interested in nutrition. I grew up an athlete. I was an athlete in college, and I was like, you know what? I need to go part-time and do something else that's just going to be just lighter, honestly. So I started doing beach body coaching, which is always so interesting. Yeah, for me I feel like reflect on. Started doing beach body coaching, and I did that for a couple of years, actually. I really did love just the kind of community aspect of that, and it helped me move more and do all those things that I needed at that time. But with the nutrition piece of it that I was, quote unquote, supposed to be sharing with I don't even know what you call them as a coach. I don't know whatever. I was like, something doesn't feel right about this. Yeah. Like this feels like, one, not enough food at all. Two, I just feel like there's just something in my gut that I'm like, I don't feel comfortable, one, talking to people about this, and two, telling people to follow these guidelines. So one of our friends, she was an NTP, and it was a completely just new field to me. I had never even heard of nutritional therapy practitioner. So I just reached out to her and I'm like, hey, what you're doing, because she was sharing on social media similar to what I do now. I'm like, this resonates with me. Like all of this feels so good. Where did you get your education? Fast forward, I ended up going through the Nutritional Therapy Association, getting my certification as an NTP, and now work with women, specifically dealing with kind of hormonal issues, birth control, as we'll get into, and kind of everything under the sun, but essentially just using food as the main tool to help them address certain symptoms that they're dealing with and really get to the root cause of their symptoms. Because, I mean, I can relate to this. I'm sure you can. Everybody probably can in America, but it's just like this revolving door of throwing Band-Aids and just quick fixes at everything. And then at the end of the day, you're just left with this issue that's unresolved. So it's been honestly incredible and so fulfilling to just be able to help women understand their symptoms and understand why they're having certain symptoms and give them tools to be like, hey, this is how we can mitigate this. And moving forward, when you're not working with me, you have all these tools in your toolbox to navigate that, and just feel empowered, honestly, and just, ask questions and dig deeper. And if your doctor is giving you an answer that you don't like, go find another doctor, and just like having those conversations too. So long story short, that's kind of how I got here and then the field that I'm in right now.
Yeah, which I'm so thankful for your platform, because it's equipping women to ask questions I never thought to ask, So if you could go back and you think of your younger self, or women that are listening and are like, I don't know what questions to ask. Where do I start? I definitely didn't learn these things when I was hearing, the sex ed talk in high school or whatever. I learned after I graduated college that I couldn't get pregnant every day of the month because I was reading Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which was mind-blowing. So if you could start with 3 things to go back and tell yourself and equip yourself, like you said, give yourself the tools to walk into womanhood with confidence, what would those be?
Oh, this is such a good question. I just feel like looking back at and I just think of kind of high school days, I just feel so naive now compared to where I'm at.
Yes.
But that's just like we weren't equipped with any of these resources, which is so sad. I would say for me personally, because I struggled bad with period cramps, that was kind of my main symptom when it came to just like hormonal symptoms. So that I wish I could go back and tell myself that magnesium 99% of the time will help with cramps immensely, and you don't have to just deal with it and take Midol and just rough it through like your softball game when you feel like you're going to explode. Magnesium is a game changer. I would say the other thing that I would have loved to know at that time was just cervical mucus is normal, because I can distinctly remember just like every month it would come and I would notice cervical mucus and I'm like, oh my God, I have an infection. Like I have a yeast infection, something's going on. But at that time I was so embarrassed. I was never going to bring that up to my mom, my doctor, my boyfriend, whoever. So just understanding that was a very normal occurrence for a healthy female body to experience would have been immensely helpful. And then, like you said at the beginning, I think the other big one was just knowing that you can't get pregnant every single day of the month. It's a very short window. And just kind of reducing that general fear of like, oh my God, it can happen at any time, and just kind of understanding your body in your cycle and those phases and all of that. I think that would have been wonderful to know back in the day.
Yes, absolutely. What has it been like for you to progress through these like life stages from, single dating to motherhood? And as your body changes and then trying to walk into these different life stages with confidence?
It has been really cool, honestly. And I think there's just been so much reflection. And I feel like I always hate to, feel regretful or like resent whether it was myself or my lack of knowledge growing up, or, different professionals in my life, or, older people that I looked up to for not sharing these things with me, because I feel like it's easy to kind of go down that route when you can just get angry and be like, why didn't I know this before? I feel like it's just the more I learn. And as you said, now that I'm a mom, that just opens up a whole other world of information when it comes to pregnancy and breastfeeding and postpartum. It's just like the information that is out there, I feel like is so empowering, and I'm just so fascinated by it. So I think it's wonderful to be able to go through these stages and then just share too what I'm figuring out on my journey and what is working for me and what's not working for me with, my following and clients and people that I'm super grateful to be able to connect with. But everybody is so different too. So it's always just sharing that with grace and being able to trying to help people if you can, and just sharing that information so they don't feel in the dark like I did at one point. Just trying to kind of get ahead of that.
For sure. And I feel like it's walking into these conversations with open hands. Like, I'm not, you're not always going to receive what somebody else's experience is, but there's this like level of empathy that so many of us have this shared experience of, I think, birth control. Like, I remember opening up, taking charge of your fertility, or like reading some of the research and then turning to friends and being like, did you know this? And we're all like, wait, what? I think I saw a reel on Instagram where it was like, oh, I went to my bestie's house for a sleepover and forgot my blanket or sleeping bag, but it's okay. I brought my birth control, like, what was it, like, documents, and it like laid out, like opened up her big all the, like the disclaimer sheet. I like died.
That's perfect. I love that.
But I didn't even know that was a thing.
Right.
So can you just go maybe just like a foundational understanding to birth? We've had this conversation on the podcast, but what do we need to know about birth control that our OBs are probably not telling us? Because I don't think I heard any number of those things on the disclaimer during my appointments.
Right. Which is so frustrating too. And now, even when I work with clients that say they're, we're having these conversations, then they're going back to their doctor, whether it's to, switch the method of birth control that they're on or talk to them about coming off. Even when they bring these things up to doctors, they just completely get gaslit, and they are like, oh, that's not an issue. That's not true. That's not valid. And it's just so invalidating for women to be going, because they are like, okay, I'm finding out this information, like this feels good. And then again, going to a trusted professional that you expect would be disclosing this information to you if you're bringing it up to them, especially. So it's just, that part frustrates me so much. Not to say that all doctors are that way, but I would say majority are still very, very hesitant to be transparent about the imbalances that it can cause. And honestly, sometimes I'm like, I don't even know if they know that. Like, I don't know if they know the extent of the cascade that birth control can cause. But to go back to your question and get off of a tangent, I would say in some of the top areas that I really focus on educating women, especially in my courses or with one-on-one clients, the way it affects your liver. So the liver is just such a foundational organ in our body. It is in charge of over 500 functions, and truly just impacts everything from our, obviously, ability to detox, to our metabolism, to our PMS symptoms, to our mental health, like all of these things. And it's just overworked constantly. So if it's constantly being exposed to these synthetic hormones and or the copper IUD, so that's not hormonal, that copper is really taxing. So the fact that that piece is not being addressed or even acknowledged to like, hey, let's throw in some liver support, knowing that we're adding this huge burden on top of you on a daily basis, is very frustrating. I would say too, the mental health piece of it, that always just really breaks my heart. I think you mentioned at the beginning, like the panic attacks in college, and it's really common for women to experience an uptick in anxiety and depression. And the stats are just insane when you do look at it, as far as even how often doctors will just simultaneously prescribe birth control and an antidepressant without even, yeah. Okay. So you can relate to
the same. Yes.
Yeah. Without even, the patient being like, hey, I do have depression. There's none of that. It's just like, this is going to come. We're giving you an antidepressant. And there's just often no conversation around that, which I just think is so unbelievably unfair to women, especially if, because it can present months down the line, years down the line. And then it feels like something that just randomly, manifested. And that can be really hard for people when they're like, nothing has changed. I feel like my life's the same. My diet's the same. I'm still moving. Like I'm doing all these things. And to, find out years down the line that it could have been birth control, as you know, is extremely frustrating. So just the impact that birth control has on our gut microbiome, our gut lining, specific minerals and vitamins that play a large role in our mental health, and just depleting those over time is really hard to see Let's see, what else? General inflammation, and just like digestive dysfunction that comes with that. So especially if you're getting any type of estrogen in your birth control, estrogen is inflammatory, and they're both going to just kind of continue to play off of each other. So it's very common for women to experience just that like bloat and retention, and that can lead to different digestive conditions, even autoimmune conditions as well, with the conversation of leaky gut, which I'm not sure if you maybe have had that conversation too on your podcast, but that's just a huge root cause of so many conditions that are out there that, again, just isn't being talked about. And it's just one of those things that, unfortunately, just with the nature of birth control and the inflammatory effect of that, it is working against our gut lining on a daily basis. So I think those are a few of the top areas. I know I kind of already mentioned the vitamin and mineral depletion, but that just across the board can lead to so much. I now do hair tissue mineral analysis in my practice, and it's fascinating, but not shocking, to see those results come back from women who have been on birth control. It's just so depleted on every level, and that plays such a large role in things like our metabolism and our sex drive and our ability to be resilient to stress, and so many of these kind of quote unquote external areas that I don't think are often put in the forefront, but are really frustrating to deal with on a daily basis.
Okay, so I think back to, like I shared, like in college, I was on birth control for forever, not even to prevent pregnancy, but for hormonal acne, which I'm sure is 80% of women's stories when they're introduced to the pill, because it's the Band-Aid solution for so many inflammatory markers. So how can we support our bodies in the transition off birth control? Because I definitely went cold turkey, and I saw the effects of that. And now, looking back in hindsight, I know I could have been more intentional about loving my body gently through that detox process. So let's definitely start there with, if you're making the transition, how can we do that well?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And like, I want to kind of expand on what you mentioned at the beginning of you going on birth control for acne, is really, like you said, I don't even know the statistic, but I would say over 80% of women are on birth control for reasons other than preventing pregnancy. And something I like to really educate clients about is, or let's just have that conversation of, what did your period look like prior to going on birth control? What did your symptoms look like? Why are you on birth control? Because it's so common for not all of those symptoms, but many of those symptoms to resurface after coming off, because like you said, it's a Band-Aid approach. The birth control is not fixing, why you had acne in the first place. It's just putting that Band-Aid on it temporarily. We take that off, and then, those symptoms can present again, which is frustrating. So with that, I think it's just really helpful to kind of reflect on that and understand what could present. So if you need to add in some additional support, if it is for acne, or if it was, like really heavy cramps, or, whatever it was, there are so many different ways and herbs and foods that we can target to make sure that we're kind of softening the blow when you do come off. But when it comes to the transition, the few different areas, again, that I typically focus on, one of those is detox. So really making sure that you're starting to support your detox pathways, just because it's going to take time for your body to fully get rid of all of those synthetic hormones or the additional copper that you are getting. So some really great herbs that I love to incorporate with clients: dandelion root tea, milk thistle tea. Those are both really great and helpful at thinning out the bile in the liver. So that really just helps kind of get rid of everything and enhance that overall liver function. Castor oil packs can be wonderful as well to utilize, just to, again, help kind of break up those particles in the liver and make sure things are flowing freely there. Outside of that, beets are really great. Beets are a great food to incorporate as well to help thin out that bile. So definitely focus on liver support. Make sure that that's a foundation that you're being intentional about. gut support as well. So like I mentioned briefly, the birth control in general alters the microbiome that we have in that balance within it. So whether you are focusing on incorporating probiotic rich foods on a daily basis or a high quality probiotic supplement, that is typically something I recommend to almost all clients, just because the likelihood that they are experiencing that dysbiosis with too much bad bacteria and not enough good is very high. As far as vitamin and mineral replenishment, my go-to recommendation is taking like a desiccated beef liver supplement and some trace minerals. That's usually like a golden combo, just to make sure that you're hitting both. Or, just focusing too on whole foods. If you're someone who really has a highly processed diet and you're not eating a lot of foods without a label, that would be something that I would really encourage you to start doing, just because food is that first healing tool. Supplements are a supplement to, our diet. You can't out-supplement a bad diet. So if it just goes back to pulling things back to the basics, I think that that's a huge, huge area to focus on, just to work on that replenishment. Let's see some other ways that you can work on easing that transition. Just addressing that inflammation again that you are most likely experiencing. So any anti-inflammatory foods are incredible to incorporate. So turmeric's a really great one, like wild caught fish, things like that. Those are all going to be really helpful to start incorporating. And two, just looking at stress. I know that can often be like, oh, we're just gonna, stress is hard to tackle because it's a huge umbrella term. But truly, if you can kind of limit or mitigate and kind of work on coping through those external stressors, that's going to help immensely with that transition, just because birth control is a large stress internally. So if we can kind of work on some of these things that I just mentioned and focus on reducing internal stressors, while also just being mindful of those external stressors as well, that will really help in that transitional process too.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with a friend recently that was like, birth control, because of my own personal experience. I mean, I was on it for almost 10 years. I wish I had known when my mom brought me into the doctor and she was like, well, like, I'm hesitant to put you on this because you may not be able to have kids. Like that alone should have been a red flag back then. But that being said, I know that it is not always best for everyone in every situation to just hop off and jump headfirst into whole food nutrition, especially if this is their first experience into holistic living. Is, hey, are you aware that birth control could be causing all of these A, B, and C symptoms that you weren't aware of? So for the women that are listening and thinking like, this is where I'm at right now. Like, I am on birth control. I don't see myself coming off anytime soon for the stage of life that I'm in. Is it almost like a lost cause because of just what we know birth control is doing in the body? Or are there ways to still support our body and our minerals and our detox pathways as we're kind of ingesting this?
Yeah, absolutely. You can still support your body. And I never want any woman to feel like if they are, whether that's their choice or medically, like they need to be on birth control in that season, that they just kind of throw their hands up and give up. There's so much that you can do to support your body while you are on it. And a lot of that comes down to doing those things that you would be doing, like we've talked about, transitioning off. Just because I kind of, in the way sometimes I like to put this, is if you're on birth control, it's almost like there's tiny, tiny holes at the bottom of this bucket, right? So say the water is draining very slowly due to the ways it's depleting you, the imbalances it's causing, whatnot. You can either just let that keep depleting and not really do anything, or you can keep pouring water in, even though imbalances are still going to happen. There's still going to be some dysfunction there, but there are so many different ways that you can work on combating that in the meantime, again, just to make those imbalances less severe. So like I said, I mean, anything that we have talked about so far, as far as the
Hmm.
probiotics, the gut health, the liver support, the anti-inflammatory, the nutrient replenishment, those are all things I highly encourage you to do if you are on birth control. And I also like to clarify too, because being in this field, I feel like people probably think like, oh my gosh, you're so against birth control and everybody should be off. And that is so not the case. There is a
Right.
time and a place, absolutely. And it is so liberating and empowering to be able to be on birth control. So if that is your season and that's where you're at, I just want you to know the imbalances that it is causing so you can implement that support and hopefully feel so much better just symptom wise. And then if and when you ever do want to come off, again, that transition is much smoother.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more to the like the mental aspect? I was reading Dr. Hill's Your Brain on Birth Control, and she just talks about there's this whole other mental component, and we've touched on it a little bit, like the anxiety, the depression, the suicide rates are
Mhm.
higher for women on the pill than naturally cycling. Like your desires in a partner change,
Agreed.
like all of these things I've just learned, and it's super fascinating. So can you speak a little bit more to the mental side of birth control and maybe how we can support our mental health?
hmm Yeah. So with mental health, a lot of it again comes back to addressing that gut health. So I mean, and there's so many great books out about just the gut brain connection, but even in general, if you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to look into it. The biggest kind of takeaway that I like to explain typically to people is talking through the vagus nerve that we have. So this is a nerve that connects our gut to our brain, and it is very much a two-way street. So a common example that I know, I mean, everybody can relate to, like if you were nervous about something, if you had like a speech in high school or a first date or
Yeah.
whatever the scenario is, you get those butterflies in your stomach. The same thing can happen if your gut is in a state of imbalance or dysfunction. That can signal up to your brain as well and cause different symptoms like the anxiety
Mm,
or the depression, the suicide feelings, those types of things. Hopefully not to that severity, but it's so common. Unfortunately, that's just
right.
the truth of what can happen. So simply by starting with your gut health and kind of just starting to unpack that a little bit, implement support with the probiotics can be really, really helpful. And then the other piece too with the gut lining, there's a lot of different foods and herbs that are super supportive with that as well. So essentially, just to break down the gut lining briefly, in case anybody isn't familiar with that. So we have our microbiome that houses the bacteria inside of our gut. Surrounding that microbiome and separating it from our bloodstream is our gut lining. Ideally, we want this to really just have very tight junctions, very small holes that allow nutrients to be absorbed back and forth. Over time, from so many different factors like stress and gluten and birth control, those tight junctions begin to widen. So now these tiny holes are starting to get bigger and bigger. And this allows for different things like protein particles and other compounds that are intended to stay inside of our gut to leak out into our bloodstream. Obviously, our body is very intelligent. It recognizes it is not supposed to be there. So it's going to elicit immune response. Inflammation is going to go up. Cortisol is going to go up. And it's just kind of this never ending cascade, honestly, if you don't work on supporting and healing that gut lining back up. But that inflammation in and of itself and that consistent cortisol release can lead to especially anxiety. I mean, that's a
Mm,
huge, huge thing that I work on a lot with clients is just regulating that. But again, we have to pull it back to really the root cause of why that typically does happen. So when it comes to some different foods and herbs that you can incorporate for supporting your gut lining, collagen, bone broth, gelatin, those are all really supportive ways to incorporate some of those foods. Aloe vera juice, throat coat tea is one that I use a lot for myself and clients. I feel like a lot of us have maybe had that if we, have a sore throat or something, but it has really healing nutrients in there like aloe, marshmallow, and slippery elm that are going to help seal up and heal that gut lining. So that's one of the main teas that I often recommend for clients that are on birth control just to have some peace of mind, like, okay, we are addressing this in some form, because that's a very large kind of undermining piece of the anxiety and some of that can come with it too.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you touched on that just because it does go beyond the, oh, you're a little stressy and depressy. Let me go ahead and prescribe you a medication, which, like I had mentioned, that was exactly what happened. I was having panic attacks in the middle of my classes where I thought I was going to have to leave. I was on birth control purely for the fact that I was on Accutane and then was still trying to mitigate cystic acne symptoms. So it wasn't for preventing pregnancy, and then turn around to get prescribed an SSRI at, double the dose that I should have been at 20 years old. To look back now and think, okay, like maybe if I had just had the tools or had my doctor sit down and be like, hey, like, if you're on birth control, let's talk about how that can interact with any number of antidepressant medications or whatever we're going to look at. So I think it's just super interesting because you mentioned earlier, I don't think it's the blame game.
Right.
I don't think a lot of providers might be equipped with this information, which allows that conversation gracefully.
Right.
But that's why I'm all the more thankful for practitioners like you that share this information, are open about it, to equip women to be able to have these conversations and ultimately like make the best decision for their own body.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. It's very important to me. And as long as you have, clients, they have the information, I'm like, you do whatever you want with it. Just, I'm giving you the information and you make whatever, informed decision that you want to. But yeah, it's just unfortunately, like you personally experience, it's a huge snowball effect of what birth control can lead to. And it's hard.
I want to transition a little bit to just some of the fun things I've seen, some of the juicy topics I've seen on your profile. One of those being caffeine, coffee talk on your period. Should we have it? Should we not? How do we wean ourselves? Should it be a late luteal thing, follicular phase thing? How do we navigate coffee in our period and why?
Yeah. I always I want to hide my face when I'm having this conversation because I know people are going to get so mad.
Sure.
But if we are getting down to the truth, so coffee, love coffee. It can be great to incorporate, but one of the main things actually that I mentioned at the very beginning for what I personally would have loved to know. So if you are someone, especially who deals with period cramps, it can be incredibly beneficial to stop drinking coffee, even like a week leading up to your period, through your period, just because it's one of those things that will deplete magnesium, and depleted magnesium levels are probably the biggest reason behind menstrual cramps. So if we're just kind of in this state, again, it's one of those other cascade things where if we're constantly drinking coffee, we're depleting magnesium. My guess is you're probably not replenishing as much as you need to. Those cramps are just going to get worse and worse. It can drive up inflammation too, especially if, you're not drinking it, quote unquote, in a smart way, like drinking it before you're eating breakfast and all those things. That's going to drive up cortisol as well. So my personal take on it and what I typically have clients do is I have them switch to like an organic decaf a week before, just kind of leading up to their period and through their period, just to take that caffeine and that stimulant effect out of the equation completely. 9 times out of 10, it helps immensely for them to do that. And I encourage you to get a good organic decaf that's going to taste the same. So the habitual aspect is still there, because I think for most people, honestly, it's not so much for the energy. It's just like, I want to have my warm cup of coffee in the morning. And breaking that habit can be hard. So you don't have to do that. You can still get some organic decaf. And kind of, as you mentioned, or kind of asked about the weaning question. And it depends how often you drink coffee. I feel like if you're drinking it every day, you probably need to wean a little bit, kind of leading up to that week before. So maybe doing some half calf a few days before, or just slightly toning it down a little bit, just so you don't hopefully experience those withdrawal symptoms. But over time, I do highly recommend that you remove coffee just during that window, especially if you are someone who is dealing with those menstrual cramps or those estrogen dominant symptoms.
Okay. I'm glad you touched on that because I love my purity coffee. But
Yes.
I didn't know if it was from the component of sourcing, because that could be a whole other conversation. Like, was it the concern for the coffee sourcing, or was it the caffeine component that does drive that issue with magnesium?
Yeah. Typically, it's more so the caffeine, obviously, with some sourcing. I mean, in so many coffees, unfortunately, contain mold and other toxins and all of
Right.
that stuff, too, that's never going to help with some of your PMS symptoms. But usually, it's the caffeine aspect in particular that is going to be driving down the magnesium.
Okay. So then it could probably be assumed my workout girlies that take a, dry scoop of pre-workout probably need to just be a little bit more cautious as they phase into their cycle as well.
Yes. Yep. That's a great question. And I would just focus too, if you are, a pre-workout girly, I would focus on maybe just some like quick carbs before your workout, or something that's going just food based that's going to give you that boost as well, without, that drastic like burst of caffeine.
For sure. Thank you for that. Which leads me to another question, because I've heard mixed things in the holistic community. Should we even expect, if everything is running optimally, should we even expect PMS symptoms? They're common, but should it be normal?
If things are picture perfect and optimal, you really shouldn't, and I'm always hesitant with my verbiage here. It's very normal to experience shifts, right? So as far as like some slight energy shifts and mood shifts a little bit, or just kind of wanting to turn inward, like those type of shifts I think are very normal. It is not normal, though, to experience the debilitating cramps, the really bad, like blood clotting, the severe bloat, like headaches, migraines, those types of things. Those are all signs that there are some imbalances going on. With that being said, though, every month is so different, and there are so many factors that can influence our period symptoms. So that can be everything from alcohol consumption to how many days you're eating out, to how you're sleeping, to if you're traveling and if you're out of your routine. It's just everything under the sun. And honestly, I feel like I try to be a very realistic person. And realistically, every month is not going to be perfect. It's never been, I mean, some months are great for me, but other months are not. And I'm like, okay, if I sit back and reflect, like I could probably write down a few reasons why, I am experiencing these changes. But I think in general, if you can strive for those months where you are just feeling the shifts rather than the true painful symptoms, and just kind of like knock you on your ass symptoms, that's the goal. But also being realistic with yourself and having grace with yourself that there are going to be months where it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. I know the very common saying, your period is like your report card of the past month. So I think it's kind of neat, because a lot of times I feel like we go through life and through, like my early 20s and whatnot, my period was my period. I didn't think anything of it. I just got through it and then moved on. But now, knowing this information, and when you are equipped with kind of understanding those imbalances and what causes those symptoms, it just allows you to sit back and be like, oh, what could I change this month coming up? Or what, how did my lifestyle or diet or whatever it was impact my cycle, and what can change. So it's just an evolving door, honestly, of continuing to just kind of work on those things and implement what you can, but also have grace that life is life, and there's going to be things that come up. So it's not always
for sure. Which I'm so thankful that you mentioned just the verbiage around shifting, because even this past month, I would say we're coming off of a extremely high stress season. We just moved out of mold. We're living with family. My husband is gone. And then I had my period had started, which I didn't have any typical, the typical inflammatory symptoms. So I was like, cool, great. But I bled a lot longer this month. So then I was like, okay, from a holistic, crunchy side of this, then those should be a whole number of red flags. But it is what it is. I knew the season we were coming off of. I didn't have it. I didn't have the debilitating headaches. I didn't have the cramps. It just came. We took it as it was. I bled a little bit longer. I was like, all right, we're going to move forward, because that's where life is right now.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I love that you're able to just be in that headspace, because it's true. And sometimes you just got to take the wins with the losses. And it's like, okay, would I rather just bleed for a couple more days, than have the headaches or whatever it is. But it changes every month. And yeah, it sounded like you have a ton going on. So that's very very understandable to have a little bit of a fluctuation there.
For sure. Well, Kelsie, this has been so fun. I know that you guys have created, I think, a new membership. So I would love just to share where a community can connect with you, resources that you have, and all of those goodies.
Yeah. No, this has been so great. I love chatting about this. And time always goes so fast when you're in the thick of it. But as far as just connecting with me, my main platform is definitely Instagram. So Buns and Balance is my handle. That's where I share most of my information. With the membership. So my colleague Sam Wolk and I, we just launched this online wellness membership for women. It's a monthly membership, and each month we are providing, different resources. There's always going to be kind of a quote unquote theme of the month, a guest speaker that's going to come on and share their expertise around whatever that looks like. And then really just providing a ton of resources. So we have discussion forums that women can connect on, whether it's about their libido or birth control or stress or whatever those things are. And then members just get the opportunity to essentially like pick my brain, pick Sam's brain just in this space. And it's really we're just looking to foster a very like transparent, open space for women to come to ask these questions that most of the time we feel uncomfortable asking. So anyway, we're super excited about that. It's called Take Care Co. I should have led with that. But you can find information on that on my Instagram page as well. And then through my bio in there, I also have information if women want to work together on a one-on-one basis. I do that. I have a couple of courses. I have a birth control course specifically for anyone who's on birth control, transitioning off, or post-birth control. So I lay out all of the education in a lot of detail and give comprehensive protocols to make sure that you are supporting your body in that season. And then I also have a PMS crash course too. So if the PMS symptoms are the big ticket item for you, it's only $25. You can download everything. It's what I basically walk through all of my one-on-one clients with. So I think those are my top kind of services and ways to connect at the moment.
Awesome. I love that. And I know that that's super helpful for women. Like I said, I wish I had some of these resources as I was going through these transition phases. But before we get into our closing question, totally off topic, but super curious, how has CrossFit been? And especially knowing like your cycle, I wouldn't say ex-CrossFit girly, but it's just not for the current stage of life. So seeing you jump into it, I was living vicariously through you and just wanted to hear how that was going.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So we started CrossFit, my husband and I, in June. And it's actually very funny. I think we joined, and then 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant. So I went to my coach, Mitch, and I'm like, hey, I know we basically just met. I'm pregnant. Planning on just, continuing forward and seeing how this goes.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because I think a lot of times with CrossFit, and I even had this hesitation as well, when it comes to like cyclical working out and syncing up with your cycle, there's some potential, friction there with that. So I have not had a cycle now that I've been working out since I've been pregnant, but honestly, I have loved it. I feel like, and again, I was a collegiate athlete. My husband was as well. So I feel like the community piece of it feels like we're like right back in that, where you just have a team, and it challenges the crap out of me. Like every day I leave and I'm like, oh, but it really does feel so good. And I feel like I'm getting stronger, which is what I wanted. We just kind of needed something different. But we've loved it so far. So I have no complaints at the moment.
Yeah. Like I said, vicariously living through you, because it's definitely, as much as people talk about CrossFit as like the cult community, it's fun, especially when you're going in with a lighthearted and like, you want to grow in strength, you want to build community. I think it really was the best place. And I think you can be equipped to do it cyclically once you have that kind of awareness and just make adjustments.
Right.
So I have one more closing question that we close with all of our guests. So if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for a community that is listening, what would you share?
I would probably just share, especially to me, because I was such a shy little individual when I was younger, but just if something feels off in your gut, ask questions and dig a little bit deeper. Like even though it's hard, especially when you are in your younger years, to dig a little bit deeper and kind of know who to trust and where to explore and all of that, just keep asking questions. Try to listen to that just like intrinsic feeling that you have, because I think that is so strong, especially for women. So yeah, I would just ask questions. If something feels off, it probably is, and just keep going until you find whatever answer that feels right for you.
Yes, and that was incredibly wise. And I'm so thankful, Kelsie, for you joining us on the show today. It was such a good conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to talk to you. And yeah, I would love to have these conversations more and more every day.
Yeah. Well, I will link all of those resources in the show notes, and we will catch you guys in the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.